Let's hear your theory on alpha theory. Do you understand it? Do you know how it works?
Well, this is a broad and controversial topic, but I'll bite. First, let's unpack the term alpha and what that actually means. The first use of the term alpha in any scientific research was in the 1920s, and it was actually used to describe chickens and the pecking order of chickens, which is why we have that term as well. But it actually became more popularized in 1947 when Rudolf Schenkel did his research on wolves, which, by the way, was the foundation research that David Mech was working off of when he started his studies in the 1970s. As I'm sure everybody already knows, the word alpha is used to designate the top animal in a linear or dominance hierarchy. And while the term alpha is actually accurate to several different social species, it's not accurate for wolves or dogs. And the reason why we so often hear that alpha theory has been debunked is because we tend to associate alpha theory with wolves. And as it turns out, it's not an accurate description of a wild wolf pack. How a wolf pack would naturally operate in the wild is based on a family structure. So it's a breeding pair and their offspring. Alpha theory is also the name given to the training approach or methodology that is based on this same research in wolves. And in this research, a group of captive, unrelated wolves was observed in order to study their social structure. And what they found is that these wolves were constantly battling it out to be in charge, to be the alpha. And this led the researchers to conclude that wolves are constantly trying to vie for alpha. And the alpha of the pack was the wolf that was the most dominant, the most aggressive, and the one that essentially won his way there. What we now know is that these wolves were only acting this way because they were unrelated, so an unnatural pack, in captivity, in a small enclosure. And this altered their social structure and their behaviors. But the damage was already done, and the concept took off in dog training. So this training approach focused on the idea that dogs are just like wolves, which, by the way, they're not. But assuming that they are, we should operate just like wolves in a pack would in order to get the behaviors that we want from our dogs. So a lot of techniques within this methodology are actually modified versions of what they saw the wolves doing to each other. So scruff shakes, where you would grab and shake the dog by the scruff, or alpha rolls, where you would forcefully roll them over on their back. These were all methods that they saw these wolves use socially, and they were adapted for dog training. Many trainers and proponents of this concept really focused on the idea that dogs will always be trying to be in charge, and any disobedience is a sign of dominance. So if your dog was misbehaving, that meant that you were not dominant enough and you needed to be the alpha and show your dog who's boss. Not only is this concept inaccurate because it's based on a flawed and inaccurate study, but it also forgets the fact that dogs are not wolves. And the little research that does exist on domestic dog social structure shows us that it is not the same as a wolf pack social structure. Needless to say, it's pretty easy to see why alpha theory should not be used for training dogs. But if we know that it's wrong, why has it persisted for so long? Well, here's the thing. Remember when I mentioned earlier that there are several social species that have linear or dominance hierarchies and have an alpha? Many of those species are primates. The reason why alpha theory has stuck around and been so hard to get rid of is because it makes sense to us, and it makes us feel good to be dominant and to be alpha, because that is something that is somewhat natural for us, but it's not natural for dogs. This is getting pretty long, but I just want to put a little note here on the end that I want to be clear. Dominance does exist. It exists in dogs. It exists in humans. We know that. But it's actually quite rare for a dog's behavior issues to be sourced in dominance. And what we as a society often think of as dominance is based on this flawed study, and it's inaccurate.